Okay, good morning, everyone, from Microsoft and the Microsoft React New York. Welcome to our webinar presented by all of us, Microsoft Reactor and the Experiments team, on moving from idea-based product planning to collaboratively building with your customers. In short, what we're trying to focus on, what we're going to talk about in today's program and the webinar is don't build a product just based on an idea, but instead co-create the experience with your customer. So my name is Vikram. Excuse me. Sorry, guys, just a minute. Sorry about that. Just had some glitch on my laptop. So my name is Vikram, and I work for the cloud division of Microsoft. The current organization that me and my partner in crime, Algosia, are part of is called the Emerging Markets. And together we lead a program across our 33,000 employee strong org to help them culturally transform in how they do product development, or primarily how to effectively bring in customer feedback as we build our products and services. And so we're here today to actually talk about that and share some of that methodology with you. So our agenda in today's webinar will be a description of the experiments methodology, how it works, and more importantly, how you can also be a part of this methodology and help. So I want to start by showing this visual because I always love starting with this visual. I think we've all heard from frustrated customers, and a lot of us, I look at this image here and I'm going to say that I've been that customer several times myself. Why could that be? But more importantly, how do we fix this into making a more happy, a more satisfied, and a pleasant customer? That's what our experiments methodology is. It's about learning how to fix this problem. But before we actually go into fixing the problem, let's take a step back and even ask ourselves, why were customers frustrated in the first place? Because just think of it as you're building products or solutions or whatever experience it is that you're building. We do a great job talking about value props and customers. We do a great job building features. We tend to focus a lot on our features. We obsess about processes. And especially the larger the company, the larger a company gets, the more we tend to obsess about the processes in building a feedback. We even say that we talk to customers. But the biggest question is, are we really listening to our customers? Well, how about we do it in a different way? Let's just try putting our customer at the center. And to be more specific, let's validate your value to create a value for your customer. And how do you do this? It's actually very, very easy. Validate the value of your business with your customers. And all that means is, and especially for a lot of you attending this presentation, some of you are probably early stage startups, or maybe even in an established company, you've got to go do a brand new project or a feature, but you've got a fixed amount of resources to build your businesses or to build your products, and more importantly, build your brand and value. So before you spend time on these limited resources, all just on an idea, learn to validate the idea first, right? You should validate that idea before you start building, or let alone even before you start paying out a whole lot of money to start engaging dev resources, to start building, to start coding it for you, or engaging VCs and friends, families for money on your startup idea. Ask yourself this. Yes, I've got a great idea, but how, as an individual or a small company, do I go and validate it? So to give you an example, right, consider you've got a great idea where, say, you want to bring something into the market. So maybe you want to provide villages and smaller towns, maybe in developing countries, safe and portable drinking water in easy to dispose 1 liter or X number of ounce bottles for what you believe appears like a very fair price, maybe the local equivalent of $1. Honestly, it's a great idea. We're always hearing about how, say, developing countries or villages in some places don't have safe and drinking portable water. So it really sounds like A, it's a great idea, and B, there's obviously a need for it. But this doesn't mean that you just go into you hire a factory, and it doesn't mean that you just go and start producing it. Instead, validate to create the value of what you're trying to build. Talk to your potential customers. Your ideas might be validated, and that's great. But you know what? More importantly, you also may end up getting a whole lot of insights. For example, they probably love your idea of drinking water in bottles, but they're just not willing to pay that kind of price for it. Remember, we said it was about the equivalent of a US dollar. So in a lot of ways, it's probably a good thing you found out, because maybe when you went about, looking at how much the factory and all the fixed costs and all that would have happened, production costs for each single bottle of water might have been over 50 cents. And if the feedback you're getting is that people will not pay $1 for portable water, it's probably not the best idea for you to be investing in. Or maybe they love the idea, they're willing to pay the price, but they also give you other product ideas, like maybe having smaller bottle sizes or using biodegradable material to package the water. Or the worst part, or I shouldn't say worst, but the best part, the best insight is, yes, there was a market need, but you may also find out the core audience, the countries, the villages that you targeted, probably already have 5 to 10 other ways of getting safe and portable water, which means going in itself, you've got so many established competitors. So again, is it such a good idea for you to get into this business? So that's really all we're trying to say, but all of it is actually so easy, right? Talking to customers, it doesn't cost you time. So before you go through the whole rigorous effort that you're so very passionate about, releasing a product and then getting feedback, learn to validate it way before. So with that said, what you have on the right is what I also, one of my favorite mantras, which is fail fast and pivot fast. So you deliver the market needs, you deliver what the market needs, and you're willing to pay for it, but also learn to embrace failure. Because to be honest, it's always important to know when an idea is not good. But I always say that there's a better option than embracing failure, and that is embracing to pivot. Just be open to it and be ready to do it quickly. So everything I'm going to cover today is really to kind of help a lot of you on a plan on how you can do so. And at the end of the session, you'll just be amazed at how it can be done so quickly. So I'm going to show you some examples that we've used internally, even in our product teams. But before we do that, though, I want to kind of set the stage on why the methodology came into being in Microsoft, and more importantly, how it's helped Microsoft on our journey to being culturally transforming to being more customer centric. Satya Nadella, our CEO, constantly tells us, he's got some amazing quotes. I mean, just listening to his presentation is always amazing. But this one particular quote from a few years ago always stands out to me. One of the messages he's always giving us internally is that we've got to learn to be a learn it all culture. And to me, this quote kind of encompasses what he means by it. Yes, we all need to learn, but how do we do it? Listen. Listen to the unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. Regardless of whether you're a startup, a founder, whether you're working in an SMB or an enterprise, that is the one muscle we should develop now, especially now more than ever. The art of listening, the art of being customer centric, and the art of being customer obsessed. So in short, if there's one thing I want you to take away, one of the few things I want you to take away from this session, that is obsess, obsess, obsess about your customer. So we have all heard this word too a lot these days, haven't we? Like I open up, say, LinkedIn, or I go to so many websites and everyone's talking about, we are customer obsessed, we are customer obsessed. And I'm sure this isn't the first time several of you have been hearing this term too. So what is customer obsession? And more importantly, what is it? How does it help you be better owners and creators of customer experiences? It's very simple. It helps you understand your customers. It helps you act quicker on the feedback that you hear. It helps you see changes in customer satisfaction and usage. And the last one, which is actually my favorite, is it helps you measure what matters. And if you are in this session today, it's going to mean one of two things. To me, that you've already started on this journey of building something amazing and you're at the beginning, or you are at the beginning. But regardless of whether you are at a concept stage, as in you've still like got an idea in your mind and you don't know if it's going to work out, some of you probably already have a product in the market. Regardless of which stage you're in, you have to continuously be customer obsessed. You have to take the time out to understand what that lovable experience is for your customer. And when I say experience, make no mistake, to me, experience literally starts with installation, down to usage, capabilities, the ease of use, pretty much everything. The whole, gamut of how that product, that experience will be used. Because especially this goes out to those of you that have got the most amazing product in the market now, or the most amazing as you would believe. Just because your product's selling well and you're making money and the reviews say, oh, that's like the most amazing product, let's be very clear, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best, or it doesn't mean that it provides your customer the best experience. They could simply be using your product out of necessity and probably waiting for a better, easier, or cheaper experience. So a great example that I can think of would be when I think of, how companies have actually made very successful shifts just based on customer obsession. A great one, say, would be the whole journey of Microsoft and other enterprises to the cloud. So if you think of it, O365, for instance, right? I don't have to go to a shop anymore or go to a website and order an Office CD. Or, for example, Teams, as we're doing now, I don't have to fly into New York, and none of us have to get together to meet in person. But we can actually do it, from the comfort of our homes. There's no more needing for you to buy a big computer for your data center or installing an enterprise product like SQL Server. Those are just great examples of how some companies have been customer obsessed. And let's talk about companies that, in my opinion, that didn't customer obsess. I could think of, say, Radio Shack or Blockbuster. And I'll also give some more examples, speak more of them as we get into the appropriate slide. But in short, it's called obsession for a reason. You continuously, with laser focus, think and breathe about the customer. You obsess in the excellence, you obsess in delivering capabilities and in making sure that you listen to the customer. So in short, you obsess in always giving your customers the best experience. And our methodology helps focus on the data, the speed, and the quality of insights that's needed for you to make those decisions around how to move your experience or your product in the right direction. So what I also do want to touch upon is why this pivotal shift, though, as in the last 4 or 5 years is how long this methodology has been into play. That's kind of around the same time our CEO came into, Satya Nadella came into, took over reins as the CEO. So it's always a good point for us to kind of take a step back and say, we always said we were customer obsessed, or we always said we had that customer empathy. So why, or what did we need to do differently that needed this change, that needed a reason for us to bring in a methodology like this? And why did we need to change ourselves to set ourselves to be even more customer obsessed? Because the most important thing, as I always say, the world is a global village. We needed to recognize that our customers have different needs and wants. So as we made decisions, as we released products, were we being diverse in our perspective? And at the same time, were we being inclusive in our approach? The second one is my favorite. We needed to talk less about ideas and instead validate our assumptions with customers. So personally, and I'm being honest, I hate the word idea. And the reason I don't like the word idea is because the minute you use the word, I've got an idea, this is my idea, it is so easy to fall in love with your own idea. And the next thing you know, you build a product, you waste people's time, you're spending so much of engineering cycles, money, or if you're, brand new startup or something, you're going and pitching the idea to several venture capitalists and, spending time getting money and hiring dev people to go do all of it, all based on an idea that was yours. And so you fell in love with it. Instead, how about we're not asking you to not have ideas and not be creative, but let's just start calling them an assumption. Because the minute you call your idea, you start calling your idea an assumption, the tendency is that you automatically want to validate it. Now, being able to scale these very basic customer connection techniques, that was a challenge as well. Because what happened, or what was going on in several big companies, is as you think about customer connection techniques and a lot of UX techniques, it was always seen as the job of researchers or designers. So we needed, as a company, to build that muscle of being customer centric and scaling some of these techniques throughout the organization, meaning, in short, it was no longer just the job of the UX, but it was the job of everybody. And I say organization, but when I say organization, just please don't think that I'm referring to an organization of thousands and thousands of people. But at any point, I mean any company at any stage, being customer centric should be an organization, it should be an org-wide muscle, regardless of how big, even if it's a 5-member, 10-member company, it's got to be org-wide. And finally, you've got to find a way to capture data, capture insights in a very meaningful and a scalable way. What that meant for us, to be honest, is we had to get out of what we call internally as the Redmond bubble, or speaking to what we call as the Microsoft friendlies, where it wasn't really just about talking to a bunch of people that we always talk to for ideas, but being able to scale out internationally, be global, get the feedback, so that way we make decisions on a more objective level versus just based on what 4 or 5 people tell us, and those 4 or 5 people being people who always to whom we always go to for feedback. So in short, the experiments methodology, if I had to give my elevator pitch, it is really something for, especially for a lot of you who are familiar with some of this, it's a lean and an agile customer-centered development framework to enable hypotheses-driven learning from customer data through rapid experiments. Now, the teams in our company that use experiments are focused on improving existing apps and services, as well as developing greenfield solutions. And in both scenarios, they connect directly with the customers and partners to get rapid insights and feedback. This helps us get alignment around our user needs and the problems we're solving together. But I think more importantly, it also helps reduce risk through rapid iterative hypotheses testing. The experiments themselves, they scale from very short release cycles. It could be days, or they could go on to a quarter or a semester, as we call it here. But the brilliance is that they're inherently measurable at every phase of development. So whether it's problem discovery, whether it's solution ideation and creation, releasing to market, or the growth in the markets, regardless. And finally, it's not just for product development, but this methodology applies equally well to hardware, software, campaigns, operations, internal processes, external processes, regardless, it applies to everything. These are various books that it's kind of been designed from. So it draws inspiration from lean startup, design thinking, and lean UX. But I also want to say that this isn't just our way of, taking it and just kind of rebranding it, but it basically takes the best of each of these into an approach that works for our cloud organization. But that said, a lot of what I show you is going to apply to organizations of smaller types too, such as startups, as long as I've been, and the mantra that I've been going on, as long as you remember the word hypotheses. That is, everything begins with validating your assumption, regardless of which stage you're in product development. So a hypothesis, in its basic definition, is the scientific method in research in which a problem or a question is identified, relevant data is gathered, and a hypothesis is formulated and tested with an experiment. And any assumption that you have can be validated. So after testing your hypotheses, there are 3 courses of action. First, you can reject the hypotheses based on customer data and create a new one. Or you can refine the hypotheses and gather more data. Or you could finally just accept the hypotheses as reasonably true and move on to the next step of your development process. This is how a lot of teams discover, design, and deliver these solutions that customers wanted and adopted. So you can create and test hypotheses to reduce development and business risk by ensuring that you're continuously learning about your customers' needs and how well you're meeting those needs. The brilliance of a hypothesis, you can measure your customer's experience, and then you can confidently take action knowing that your decision is grounded in reliable customer data. And I know what I just said sounds, very simple, but regardless of which audience you're going into, regardless of what decision even you have got to make as the owner of an experience in some shape or form, just having that objective customer data, nothing's more powerful. Nothing's more powerful than hearing it from the mouth of a customer. Nothing is more powerful than showing the data to a leader to get buy-in from stakeholders saying, well, regardless of what I think about what we should do, this is what the data speaks. So our experiments methodology is, as I said, giving a diverse audience a voice, identifying your assumptions, building and validating your hypotheses, actively listening to users. If you remember the quote from Satya Nadella about their unmet, unarticulated needs, and finally, ideating and co-creating those solutions. However, what I also want to be very clear is what experiments is not. And experiments is certainly just not doing what our users say. You might remember the famous Ford quote about if we'd listened to our customers, we would have built faster horses. It's not about impeding the process of innovation or a voice of customer channel where you just start asking, collecting feedback on features. And it's certainly not another opportunity for you to discuss specs, features, get into troubleshooting, or even selling your technology. Now, I'm not saying any of these are wrong. I'm not saying that you do not want to be, I'm not saying don't troubleshoot, debug things with customers, but I'm just saying that as you're going about having a conversation with a customer specifically on how you can build the next amazing experience or modify the existing the existing amazing experience to make it even more amazing, that is not the time for you to be getting into troubleshooting, but it's really more to be actively listening to your customers. One of the reasons we wanted to do this webinar, as I said, is the experiments methodology is proving to be very successful within Microsoft, within the cloud division where, the program that we run. And so before we go into it, we just wanted to show you some products just in the last year, the last 12 months or so, that have actually been built using experiments. We had Azure Synapse, for those of you where like a data warehouse, which is essentially a limitless analytics service that brings together enterprise data warehousing and big data analytics. Azure Lighthouse, again, it lets service providers manage your resources across all their customers with higher automation, scalability, and enhanced governance. We have Azure Sentinel, which is a security information event management system. Azure Stack, which is one of the early experiment adopters and continues to be hugely successful for for Microsoft. And more importantly, even other than products, we've even had scenarios like Azure FarmBeats, which helps build artificial intelligence and machine learning models based on fused data sets. And each of these have just been used. The reviews have been amazing. They've been used by thousands of customers around the world. So with all of that said, we can dive into, I guess, the question most of you are wondering, which is, okay, so what is this methodology all about? As I said, validate, validate, validate your assumption. The key is in validating your assumption. Remember, I said, don't build something based on an idea. Start with your assumption. Create a testable hypothesis, and I'm going to show you how in the next slide. Very easy. Or a prototype if you're in a solution ideation phase. And all you've got to do is run an experiment with your customer to test. What is an experiment? It could be as simple as an in-depth interview. It could be surveys. There are various stages, but it could be a very common UX technique depending on which stage you're in. And finally, what are those insights that you learned? Evaluate. This is a great opportunity for you to evaluate your hypotheses, and you've got an opportunity to move ahead or just say, you know what, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to move on to something else. Here is what I want to tell you. I know I keep using the word validate a hypothesis, and you're probably thinking in your mind, okay, what happens if the hypothesis was not validated? What if I was on a completely different tangent? Please remember that this isn't about how many of your assumptions were correct or wrong. Because honestly, this is something that I always say, there's no such thing as a bad interview with a customer. There's no such thing as a bad, any kind of customer connect session. In my opinion, the only bad interview or the only bad experiment that you had, a customer connection that you had, was the one where you didn't get any insights. So by going in with maybe you've got about half a dozen ideas in your head and you want to go validate them, and none of those ideas are things that your customers want, that does not by any means mean that you need to get demoralized to beat yourself up. It's brilliant because you know what? Think of the opposite scenario, right? Where if you had not validated it and you'd completely gone off and built something without asking the customer. And keeping this image in mind, the validating assumption wheel of build, measure, and learn, we now apply it across all 4 stages of your product development. And the first one is your customer. And you heard it right. Figuring out or connecting with customers is by far the most crucial part of product development. And why is that? Because do we know for sure who our customer is? Well, guess what? Whoever you believe is the customer or the target profile of something that you're building, that is an assumption too. So before we even start validating our ideas and assumptions with these customers, and I'm saying customers with air quotes, let's even first make sure that we're talking to the right kind of customers. And this is so very important because anyone who's been around me and my poor partner in crime, Margosia, is probably sick to death of hearing me say this. My common mantra is I always say it's better you don't interview any customers than interview customers of a wrong profile. That is how crucial it is for you to nail the right kind of profile. So you always start by creating a screener. Define your customer not as someone who is necessarily using your product, even for those of you who've got products already out in the market, but as someone who can benefit by your product or service, because that will help them in their most commonly performed or primary job. We call it jobs to be done, and I've got a separate slide around it. Once you've got that screener, use that to recruit your customer. And then before you know it, you will have a few personas, or rather, more importantly, you will have personas not necessarily just based on titles, but based on their primary jobs. And that gives you the opportunity to confidently say, these are probably the people that I will get the most feedback from. I also do want to stress on the importance of not only managing this customer pipeline, but making sure that it's refreshed very often. There are times where maybe, some customers are not using the technology anymore and you have to kind of move them along and, kind of get fresh customers in that place. Also, I'm not spending too much of time around data and privacy, but do know, especially in today's industry, that is also an important thing. So that is something you need to think of as you're bringing in customers into your pipeline and making sure you're following all the standard operating procedures and storing their data securely. But once you have defined your customer, we can now move to the second stage, which is identifying a problem. Or to be more specific, what is the top problem or the top business need that we need to solve? Because it's very simple, guys. If we wanted to go solve things for our customers, and if we had an infinite number of hours every day, and we didn't have to do anything else in our lives other than work, 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 we could go solve all the problems for our customers. But the reality is we've got a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources. So how do we solve the most important thing that can be the biggest bang for a buck? So once we've identified our customer, the next stage is identifying what we believe is that top problem to solve. So start by listing out what you believe is their primary job and the problems you assume they're running into. Build a hypothesis, which I've spoken about hypotheses, but I'm going to get into how you construct a hypothesis later. Conduct interviews and obtain valid insights. Now, I'll get into details on, you see the word jobs to be done there. I'm going to get into details on what that means. But the most important part is learn from your customers the job they do, the gains they get by doing those jobs, and the pains they encounter. actively listen. Learn the art of open-ended questions that dig for information to understand the whys and the hows. Once you have done that, once you believe that you've got sufficient data, you've identified the top problem, you've probably had to iterate a few times, but you've got the right data to confidently move ahead to creating a solution. This is where, again, I want to make it clear that it's not just about building a product that fixes a problem, but it gives the customer that lovable experience of wanting to use your product or your service again and again and again. And this is also a great point, a great part where customer centricity comes in again. For several of us, and I know, Microsoft and so many companies are guilty of it. It's this point where we generally say, okay, we know what the customer's top problem is. Let's go build something in the next few months to give it to the customer. Let's just go dark and let's just build something because we know what the customer wants. And what ends up happening? Assumptions. We assumed, right? I had the solution idea that XYZ might solve my customer's problem. And I ended up building it just because I fell in love with my own idea. So as part of the experiments methodology, let's try doing it in a different way. Even though, even your idea at this moment of what a good solution is just that, an idea. So even here, let's validate your assumption. Test your solution hypotheses with a customer and iterate until it lands on the perfect customer experience. Because if you don't do this, you're going to fall into the trap of several companies. You'll create something, you're going to toss it over the fence, hoping your customers like it. And when you're not seeing enough usage, what do? You don't want to admit that your product's probably not the most successful, so you start spending time selling and promotion and marketing and, buy 3, get 3 free, or convincing your customer that they should be using that particular product or service. But instead, let's leverage the power of our methodology to build the experience with the customer. We work with the customer to help them build this experience that will not only solve their problem, but delight them in using it and wanting to come back and use it again and again. And that is so crucial for a lot of you, especially for those of you in, early stage startups and new companies, where that is how you grow your customer base, your loyalty. And from a metrics point, especially if you're working on, any product in the cloud, that is how you ensure consumption. These days, it's really all about consumer revenue. And that's how you get to that stage when you build that lovable experience. And in the final stage, you're now at a stage where you've got a validated concept, right? You've worked with your customer, you've got a validated concept. So at this point, you can now very confidently go and start building prototypes. You can test the prototypes with your early stage customers, the prototypes or the MVP with your customers and partners, and you can evaluate it against the measures, the KPIs, whatever you call it, that you set for yourself. And what this really means is now, as you're getting ready to build your MVP, you've got all the great data, but you're actually going in with a lot of confidence, given that you've got the truth, the customer, which is basically the customer data and the insights. And you know what the coolest part about all of this is so far, in case you haven't missed it, in case you've missed it, you still haven't written a single line of code. You haven't even committed to getting a lot of money from your startups to build something successful that probably would not have been successful. All you did was just take a few sheets of paper, a few phone calls, and just very quickly iterated and spent time with your customers. Before I get into the concepts that we use in our experiments methodology, what is common in all 4 phases? 1, you validated assumptions in each stage, if you remember. And the second and the most important commonality, you always kept the customer along for the journey. So I used a whole lot of concepts as I was talking through the 4 stages of our methodology. So I now kind of want to dive into each of these. These are some words, that have kind of almost become second speak even within Microsoft. The first one being jobs to be done. What are we signifying in the screen? What we're trying to say is that manufacturers do not necessarily want a 1/4-inch drill, but they want a 1/4-inch hole. And this is a very famous picture by Mr. Lewitt. Sorry, name just drew a blank on the name. But think of it this way. Manufacturers have many options for making a hole. They could cast it in place, they could punch it out, they could use laser cut, machine it, mill it, or use electrical discharge machining. So try not to focus on the quarter-inch drill, because essentially what manufacturers want is a quarter-inch hole. Do you remember earlier when I was talking to you about customer obsession, about companies that successfully pivoted and maybe companies that didn't necessarily successfully pivot? Well, in my opinion, one of my personal favorites to talk about in a not so good way is Blockbuster. I did mention Blockbuster earlier, and at the same time, we've seen how successful Netflix has become. And why is that? Because if you look at Blockbuster, they focused very heavily on the task. The physical stores, right? Going into one of their stores, renting a DVD, and they focused so much on making the store experience amazing. I filled out so many surveys in my time at Blockbuster on, what else can we add to our stores? How can we make the store more inviting? And how can we just make the store experience, even better than what it is? Which at times, I have to be honest, it really was. I know they took the feedback to heart and they made some of their stores amazing. But did we ever focus on what is the customer's primary job? Basically, how the primary job here was that customers just have the easiest and the nicest experience to consuming entertainment. That is what Netflix focused on. If you remember, they started out those days by posting DVDs, and well, we practically all of us have, majority of us may have a Netflix account these days. And that's a great example of how successful they are today, because they didn't focus on the task, but they actually focused on the job, and the job in the scenario being how do we get customers the easiest and how do we just make entertainment consumption easy for customers? And it's so crucial. I started with this example because that's what I want you to think of a job. It's not a task. Several tasks add up to the job. And as you want to build that customer-centric muscle, as you want to go listen to customers and what it is they're trying to do, please know the difference between a job and a task. A more simpler example, outside of the whole Netflix and the Blockbuster thing would be, for example, a job would be sharing information. A task is sending email. So whilst it's really good for you to understand any challenges that your customers having sending email, true customer centricity is when you start learning about their job of sharing information. So every time in your mind, just ask yourself when the customer talks to you about how they're doing a certain thing, ask yourself, okay, but I need to know the job, I need to know what the end goal is, versus focusing on the task, at least in the beginning. And as I say here, a customer really just uses your products, software, services to get a job done. This is their business objective of using a piece of technology, but it's not about the feature or the functionality. And also know many times that people don't just do a job necessarily only in a functional way, but there's also probably a social or an emotional reason for them wanting to do a certain job and in a certain way, right? And once you have your job, you can now go into building the hypotheses to begin this conversation. So the core to validating your assumption, as I've kind of been talking in this whole theme, is building a strong hypothesis. And this has to be built around your job that the customer is doing versus being feature-centric. So this is what a hypothesis looks like. And here's an example of actually something that's been taken from one of the teams, Power Apps team, within Microsoft as they were going on and building their next version of experiences. The goal of a hypothesis is to build a foundation or the starting point for a discussion guide, which is why, even though we've been talking about a hypothesis, you don't share a hypothesis with your customer. And there's primarily two reasons for that. Number one, by showing them what you believe your hypothesis is, you're kind of already leading them by asking them this question. But more importantly, the goal of a hypothesis is to help get you those insights, those deep, dark, why and how, and tell me more insights from customers. By just showing them a hypothesis, you probably we'll end up getting a yes, no, agree, disagree kind of a response, which is kind of what we want to avoid. So as I said, never share your hypotheses with your customer. These are some more examples of hypotheses from various groups across Microsoft. What's brilliant about it is there isn't a single feature level description written. All of these have to do with jobs. I think one of my favorite ones here is the last one, where we just say that we believe developers are frustrated about a certain job to be done being technical solutions, because code samples are missing or they're of low quality. That's it. That's all you've got to start with. As you validate it, you will get those insights. So once you've got your hypotheses, as I said, it's about finding the right kind of customers. I've listed different ways. You've got to be very clear on your screening criteria. The screening criteria in this case being, it's got to be a primary job. So as I always say this, anyone can come and ask me a question on, say, Microsoft Excel. Because yes, I have used Microsoft Excel, but you know what? I'm not a data analyst. I am not a business admin. So I don't use Excel very regularly. I probably just use Excel to, I don't know, just maybe once a month, maybe to list a few personal expenses or something. So I'm not saying that I can't give you in the scenario being the Excel product manager, I'm not saying I can't give you feedback on Excel. I'm just saying for your sake, I'm probably not the best person for you to ask. So when you think of a screening criteria, think about somebody whose primary job is that. And then I've listed different ways in which you can get potential prospects and potential customers for you to start talking to. And of course, I did talk about data privacy in my number 4. Make sure you're capturing the contact information securely and you're following all of that. Once you've got the customer data, you can start running the experiments. Start with small-scale qualitative testing, such as in-depth interviews, confirm it with surveys, and make sure you're not only aggregating the data in one place, but you're sharing these insights with the team. Again, it's all about digging deep. It's about being customer-centric, and it's about being very objective and not leading the witness, so to speak. So whenever you go in for an interview, and I cannot stress this enough, even if you've been interviewing for the longest time and you believe you've got a hold on it, please be prepared. Use a discussion guide. Avoid asking leading questions. Learn from open-ended questions, and always probe for details. Dig deep and ask why. Another thing that I think I'm guilty of, and something that I need to learn to do better, is learn to embrace silence. Let the customer answer the question, because if a customer is quiet, please don't assume that they're quiet because they didn't understand the question. It just probably means they're thinking. So let them think. Avoid lengthy descriptions and examples, because it not only confuses the customer, but it can also be very leading. Don't interrupt. Paraphrase if you're not clear about something, and always quantify consistently to identify frequency and impact. How many times have we, for example, had a customer who, especially those of you who've got a product in the market, customers come up to us or they give us feedback and they say, well, this feature doesn't work. This feature is really painful. Yes, that is valid feedback. But as you thank them for the feedback and you ask them how often it happens or what the impact is on a scale of 1 to 10, you'll be amazed at how this makes the customer stop, think. And I've literally seen this happen myself, where customers say, well, that isn't such a problem now that I think of it. If you want to know what my real problem is, a problem that's more impactful, a more frequent problem, and a problem that doesn't have a workaround, it is blah, blah, blah. And they tell you something completely different, which is kind of, again, the power of constantly asking your customers to just quantify on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 5, frequency, impact, and workarounds. Because again, it's different aids to kind of get the customer to go back in and tell you a real problem. This to me is the art that I was telling you about of actively listening, so you can listen to those unarticulated needs of customers. And once you've got all of this, once you've kind of done a few interviews from customers, You can now distill qualitative insights. You can analyze any surveys if you needed to. And if you did validate your hypotheses, that's brilliant. You can now move to the next stage of creating a solution. If not, you can adjust your hypotheses and retest. I do also get asked this question quite often, which is, how many customers do I talk to? There is no benchmark. I've heard all kinds of things like 20 at 20, 40 at 40, all kinds of things. Internally, because I know we're all racing around deadlines and it's very difficult these days to get customers' feedback. So I've generally believed that if you've got the right kind of customers, if you've done the right due diligence in screening, and you believe those customers match your profile, generally I've seen very strong themes emerge even after around 10 to 12 interviews, about a dozen interviews. That itself should give you about a 70 to 80% confidence on top areas, top problem areas. And following up with a survey could even give you like a 90 to 95% confidence. So you should be good enough to move to the next stage. And if you did not validate your hypotheses, as I say on this slide, adjust it and test it for different customers, different problems, or different scenarios or tasks. Now, once you've finished identifying your problem, and as I said, don't go dark and don't just build a solution based on an idea, but also build it with a customer. The concept value statement is a verbal, written description of the solution that emerged from your learnings, as well as the brainstorming and the data that was collected in your problem hypotheses experiments. So you will test this with customers to determine if your solution hypothesis is true. You can also use a storyboard to help explain the idea and get feedback on the value. And this process kind of continues with increasingly higher fidelity solutions like wireframes, prototypes, until, of course, your solutions evolve to a point where you've got a shippable MVP. So a solution concept hypothesis looks something like this. We believe that a certain concept will reduce pain and increase gain for a customer when they're doing a certain job to be done. Very, very simple. Again, we've not gotten into features yet. Once you're here and you've now got a bunch of ideas, like the idea from the previous slide, the concept. Unfortunately, you can't see me circle my finger around that word. But once you've got a bunch of concepts, you can now take this to your customer, very simple, like the screenshot here, and just ask a customer, hey, customer, did this idea solve your problem? Could you give us some feedback, or simple, can you just rate these various solutions? I've got about 3 solutions here. This is what the concepts are. Can you tell me if they solve your problem on a scale of 1 to 5? That's it, keeping it very simple. And once you're done there, this is now you take your concept and you build a storyboard. What you're seeing on screen right now, I kid you not, was actually from our cloud and infrastructure team. And these were actually storyboards that were shown to CIOs. I remember on this particular one, I think there was a CIO from Dell, I think. It's about 2 or 3 years ago. It's really a storyboard, not talking about the feature, but it's a storyboard that talks about this is how the solution, or this is how you, the customer, your day is going to be better if we implement the solution. It's very organic, and it gives the customer opportunity to pitch in on what might work and what might not work. And once you've got that solution in place, you can now get down to more what I'm going to call the tactical stuff. So you can now build, as you see here, we move into wireframes and prototypes. These are actually early prototypes and wireframes from Azure Global, the group that Margosia and I are part of. And this was initial sketches done for the Microsoft Community Training MCT, or Product Sangam as it was called in its code name. And finally, what you're seeing here is another wireframe of what the experience is for a customer. As you can see, there's no voice in it. It's just a video that's shown again to your prospective customers, where you now show them the experience of what it's like to use this product. As you can imagine, it's kept quiet for a very simple reason. We want the user to go along with the experience and comment themselves versus us having to explain how it works. Because if we start explaining how it works, then again, we are leading the witness. And sitting in on some of these calls and, just listening to the prospective customer's experience is always an amazing thing, because it's just amazing how they start with, okay, what's going on here? And the next thing you know, there's probably a few moments of awkward silence, and then they're kind of almost in the game, and sometimes they're even predicting what's going to happen next. And we get some amazing insights, and and they just literally start expressing themselves. So the video hasn't paused here, by the way. If you see there, it says estimated time 14 seconds. So the team that built this video actually tried to replicate it. But as the video is going on, and I know we've got about 5 minutes left, so I do want to talk about before I move into the call to action slides, doing things like this, as I said, gives you better clarity of what you're building. Whether you're a startup that's got an idea, that's got a brilliant idea, and you're trying to take it to market, or if you're an established company that's trying to build a next gen version of your product, this just gives you better clarity. It gives you better clarity of what your target market is, but more importantly, as you just saw from the solution phase, a better clarity of the immersive, lovable, more importantly, repeatable experience that your target market is looking for. So before we go into Q&A, I do have 2 call to actions. First off, we are considering taking this methodology outside of Microsoft. And for those of you on this call, we would love for you to be part of this journey. Our goal eventually is to create a community where all of you, early startups or founders, CTOs, everyone around the world can come together to share ideas, participate in discussions, and ask us questions really in a community style environment. And of course, as we take this methodology outside, we want to reach out to as many people as possible to understand what it is we need to put together to make this effective for each of you. So if you are interested in being part of this community, please send us an email to CP Engage, and we'll keep you updated of our progress. And it's CP Engage, so it's just one E, CPE, CP Engage at Microsoft.com. But in the meantime, here's how you can easily get in on the action. If you want to help participate in helping our program, it just takes about 2 minutes for you to opt into our program. And what we do is we reach out to each of you and invite you for these engineering feedback sessions based on your interest. And you will see how the engineering groups are now trying to be more customer obsessed by actually bringing you in early on in the journey, and even before a single line of code is written. Unlike the old world where, I hate to say it, but a call from Microsoft just probably generally meant we would show up, we do all the talking, and we try to sell our features to you. So very simple. The QR code's there, but the website again is aka.ms influence ms. So with that said, I will pause. I do apologize. I was hoping I could wrap this up 5 minutes earlier, but I will open it up for any Q&A.
Thank you, Vikram. There are 2 questions. I think we could combine them to talk in general about customers and pipeline for customers, and whether the techniques that you've discussed work for startups or only companies with established customer pipeline.
Sorry, Malgosia, the line just cut a bit. Sorry, do you mind repeating it?
Sure, no problem. Yeah. I'm just going to combine the 2 questions that are posted here to talk a little bit more about the customer pipeline, and specifically whether the techniques that you discussed apply to companies with established customers or startups who maybe not have customers yet. And the second one was more about customers, and maybe there being platforms out there that you could leverage for customer insights. Or specifically, I think it was about consumer insights.
Yes, amazing. Both are very good questions. Let me hit the first question first. Regardless of whether you're literally a startup, 4 members in a tiny little shop and you don't know what you want to go build, or an established company, it doesn't matter. This methodology applies to both. I'm going to say if you've got an established product, maybe you're going to have an advantage in the first stage. But also remember, and that's kind of where the jobs to be done comes in, it's not about who's a user of your product. It's about what is the scenario that you're creating in your product or service, and who is the target customer for it. And so sometimes even established products need to go look for brand new profiles of customers depending on who could be using it. So in that sense, it's kind of the same whether you're a brand new startup or a customer, an established product. Now, the second question is very interesting. I think what the second question is asking me is, can we leverage secondary research? There is no yes or no answer to this. I'm just going to say, please be very, very careful on what it is you're planning on using the secondary customer research for. Because at times, what you believe is the truth can actually, or what you believe is the data, can actually be the noise. And if you're trying to build an experience or you're trying to figure out something, maybe the data that was collected, it could probably be old, it could probably have been collected for something completely different, or it probably could have been collected at a very task-specific level whilst you're thinking of an experience. And to kind of give an example, this is kind of another one of my personal favorites, like the one I gave about Blockbuster and Netflix. I have to compare iPod to Microsoft Zune. There's a reason Microsoft Zune wasn't very successful, and at times it felt like we were trying to create the next iPod. But if you actually look at it, why was it very successful? It wasn't just because of the portable device. It wasn't because of the click wheel or anything. It was because of the vast access to the iTunes music catalog and the fact that you could carry all of those songs in your pocket. So why I mention this is if, for example, somebody here is trying to go build the next MP3 player and they're referring to consumer insights of, do users like the click wheel of an iPod? That is probably not the best kind of research you should be doing, because then you don't want to just be copying just kind of copying another feature or a task. So all I'll say is please proceed with caution when it comes to secondary research. It's not completely bad, but also know that it can be very misleading. Any other questions?
Thank you. There are no further questions. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to consider opting into our program at aka.ms, influence MS. That's aka.ms, influence MS, or send your email with interest to join the community to cpengage@microsoft.com. You could also use this for any additional questions after this session.
Great, thank you, Margosha. So with that, we would like to conclude today's event, and thank you very, very much for joining. And again, we look forward to your participation, both from the, signing up for the feedback session, but also, as I pointed in my previous slide, if you could also join our community so we can keep you updated on our plans for taking this methodology externally. So thank you very much.